What's up, Woodmont Student Ministry? I hope you guys are doing good. I don't know when you're watching this. It might be your fall break, so I hope you are on vacation or enjoying not having school if you get fall break this week. I wanted to mix it up a little bit this week. I got a little bit bored with just sitting in my office and talking to the camera, so I'm going to move around a little bit this week because we are starting a new series. So if you remember, the last couple weeks we've been talking about community and what it looks like for our life groups to be community and for our youth group to be community for one another, especially coming out of a time where a lot of us might have been lonely or not around a lot of our friends. So we spent a couple weeks on that, and now I want to transition us to, for the next couple of weeks, I want us to talk about the book of John. So we're going to do it a little bit differently. Instead of talking about a subject, we're going to look at some scripture together and talk about it for the next couple life groups. I don't know exactly how long this will take, but it'll take more than 1 or 2 weeks. So today we're going to look at the very first part of John. If you're not familiar with the book of John, it is kind of split up into 2 different parts. You have part 1, which looks at the first 3 years of Jesus' ministry. So if you remember, Jesus doesn't start his ministry until he gets baptized, and he doesn't get baptized till he's like 30. So Jesus has already lived a good chunk of his life before he starts teaching and before he starts preaching, at least the way that we have it recorded. And so the very first part of John looks at Jesus' teaching and his preaching to the people around him and all of his followers. And part 2 only looks at 1 week of his life. So part 1 looks at 3 full years, and part 2 just looks at 1 week, and it's the week that Jesus dies on the cross. It spends a lot of time telling us what happens on a day-by-day basis. And so as we go through this series, we're going to look at those 2 different parts. But today, in this lesson, we're going to talk about part 1. So the first story that I want us to look at comes from John chapter 2. It's verses 1 through 12, and I'll let you guys read it with your life group, and I'll retell the story here. But this scene takes place when Jesus goes to a wedding. And if you've ever been here before, let's see, in our courtyard here at church, this is where a lot of people get married. It's actually where Tatum and Keller got married. They got married right in here. And people love wedding ceremonies. Wedding ceremonies is this beautiful affirmation of a bride and a groom who are looking at each other and saying, "I choose you." You know, normally the way things work for us, you have a choice in who you marry. Normally someone will propose and they get to choose, who am I going to propose to? And then the person who gets proposed to gets to decide, do they say yes or do they say no? But that's not how it worked in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, normally the dads, the parents of the 2 people who are getting married will meet up with each other, and they would say, "Hey, I have a son. He's ready to get married. You have a daughter. Is she ready to get married? If so, could I buy her hand in marriage for my son?" And they would make some kind of deal. They'd strike some kind of trade where they would give them sheep, or where they'd give them servants, or where they'd give them clothes or wine or whatever it might be in order for their kids to get married. And it was this strange deal that we don't really relate to anymore because we have a choice. So these wedding ceremonies were a huge deal. It wasn't just about the bride and groom, it was about the families coming together and striking this business deal. And so the wedding ceremony sometimes would last 7 days. And whoever was the host of the wedding ceremony had a huge responsibility. They had to make sure that everything was just right over the course of 7 whole days. And it even was illegal for the hosts of the wedding to do things like run out of wine. It would violate the terms of the agreement, and the wedding would be no more. They would have to call it off. So it's a really big deal to be the host of one of these weddings in the ancient world. So Jesus shows up to this wedding ceremony with a couple of his disciples, and Jesus' mom is there. And some people actually believe that Jesus' mom might have been in the wedding ceremony. Probably not the person getting married, but probably one of the important guests, one of the honored guests. And so at this wedding ceremony, the host of the wedding realizes they're running out of wine. That's a huge deal. Remember, these ceremonies would go on for so long, and if you ran out of wine, it was illegal at times. And so this the host of the party goes up to Jesus' mom, Mary, and he says, "Hey, we're running out of wine. I need your help. As someone who's a part of the bridal party, can you help us figure this out?" And Mary looks around and she knows that her son is Jesus. He's the Son of God. He can do miraculous things. So she goes up to Jesus and asks for his help. "Hey, can you help me get some wine? We're running out." The host is in a lot of trouble. And Jesus looks at her and essentially says, "I don't know if I want to. Because if I perform this miracle right now, it kind of starts a ticking clock that leads to my death. He knows that once he starts performing miracles and once he starts showing that he's the Son of God to people through his signs, that it puts a clock on his ministry. And he knows how that'll end for him. But he looks at his mom nonetheless and says, okay, let's do it. Let's turn some water into wine. So Jesus decides that he's going to turn the water into wine. And so he calls for his disciples and for some of the servants at the wedding to help him with it. And he says, hey, I'm going to do this, but I need your help. So he sends the servants to go grab these big jugs so that he can fill them with water. Maybe something that looks a little bit like this. And they take them start to fill them with water. So perhaps like this water right here, the water that Jesus would have gotten was not intended to drink. That water was intended to clean. It was especially intended to clean people's feet. So it's not like Jesus was getting smart water and filling it up. He was getting the dirty water and asking people to fill up 6 big jugs so that he could perform his miracle. So Jesus goes and he turns this water into wine. And the original language that the story was written in says that when the host of the wedding, remember the guy that was going to be in legal trouble if he ran out of wine, when he tries this wine, he says, this is the best wine that I have ever tasted. And Jesus performs this miracle and he kind of saves this host. He saves him from a lot of trouble. But not only does he take dirty water that would have been used for cleaning people's feet, not only does he turn it into wine, but he kind of goes above and beyond. He doesn't just turn it into cheap wine, he turns it into the best wine that people have ever had. And initially there's only a couple people who know about this miracle. It's Jesus, his disciples, his mom, and the host. And that's about it, because he did it in a back room. But this miracle that he does in a back room, in a kitchen, kind of like where I am, eventually goes out to everyone at the wedding. And they all get to have the wine. They all get to be a part of this miracle that Jesus just performed. So this is kind of a weird story, right? We have Jesus, who hasn't even started his ministry yet, who for his very first miracle decides that he's going to turn some water into wine. And I learned this week as I was looking into this story and researching it and reading about it, that some people actually believe that this story took place 7 days after Jesus got back from the wilderness. So 7 days after he started his ministry, Jesus goes to a wedding. He goes to a party, and he decides to help out the person at the wedding who got himself in some trouble. And if you remember back to the creation story, which we talk about a lot, which I think is really, really important, what does God do on the 7th day? God rests. He takes a break from his work. He just created humanity and decides to sit back and rest. And Jesus in some ways does the same thing here. He's just spent the last 7 days, some people believe, starting his ministry, getting his followers. And he spends the 7th day not doing more homework, not doing more reading, not trying to memorize more of the Old Testament, but he goes to a party. He has fun. He relaxes. But then he gets called on to do some work. He gets called on to perform a miracle. But I think the important part here, I think maybe one of the things that we often miss in this story, is that Jesus went to a wedding. Jesus wanted to have fun. Jesus, yes, he's the Lord of all creation. He's the person who died for our sins. But he was also a human, and he also wanted to have fun. So why do we start with this story? Well, if we're going to look at John, thought it might be important to start at the beginning, to look at the first miracle of Jesus. But I do think it's important, and I want you guys to talk about in your life groups, why does Jesus do this miracle? He thinks he's going to relax. He thinks he's going to have a good time at a party. And he decides to do a little bit of work. He decides to help someone when his mom asks for it. So I want you to talk about in your life groups a couple things. I want you to talk about, why does Jesus do this miracle in the first place? What's important about it? I want you to talk about, if you were in the shoes of the wedding planner, of the host, how would you feel when you start to realize that you're running out of wine, that you might be in some trouble? How do you feel? And then how do you feel when Jesus performs this miracle, and not only does he make cheap wine, decent wine, but he makes the best wine that you've ever had? He wants to give a good gift to us. He wants to give a good gift to this wedding host. How does that make you feel? What do you think about that? Because when you guys come to life groups, we're going to be out here in this parking lot, the one that's right by the columns right here. So we'll see you guys here on Sunday night. I'm excited to talk about this story with you and hear what you think. We love you. We can't wait to see you on Sunday night.